supposed to be, you don't get out of, nobody gets out of here alive, or almost nobody. And it was really going to be a look at the 3 weeks and the Churban Beit HaMikdash and so on. So, fearing that at least more than one hand was going to go up when I asked that question, what I will do is I will just take a few minutes to explain the People's Talmud, what it's all about, and then afterwards, if there are any questions, Moshe would be, I'll be happy at the end of the class to explain it further. And then I will also tell you that the class which we will go to, which you can leave if you didn't want to come for that, that's okay, is built on this People's Talmud. So it's a good example of what I'm going to share with you. So in brief, the idea is like this, that the Talmud is the OS, it's the operating system of Jewish thought. From the Talmud comes everything. You can go from there into Kabbalah, if you've learned the Gemara Chagiga and many other sources. Obviously Jewish law, Jewish philosophy, you name it, anything that comes, even those things which we identify as so distinctively Jewish. Women lighting Shabbat candles, where do you know that from? It's not in the Torah, right? This is all in the oral tradition, and that which makes our unique relationship to the Bible is the oral tradition, right? For example, it says in the Torah or in the Bible, right, an eye for an eye. Well, what if the person who stabs out somebody's eye only has one eye? So if you stab out his eye, now he will be permanently blind, but he didn't blind the other person, he just took out one eye. Or what if the person whose one eye lost, his whole life was that he looks through a microscope and he looks at gems, whereas the other guy, obviously nobody wants to lose an eye, but he doesn't necessarily need the eye for what he does for his work. So therefore, the oral tradition comes along and says, certainly eye for an eye cannot be understood literally, and therefore explains to us it means monetarily. The value of that person's eye needs to be replaced, as if you were actually replacing the eye in its value of what was lost. Okay. That's one of millions of examples. Therefore, the Talmud not only is the platform of Jewish thought, the Talmud has also been that which has experienced every single civilization. Every single movement in history, the Jews have been there with their Talmud and extrapolating and continually adding and understanding and using the didactics and all the rest of what the Talmud is. In fact, the Talmud is the original Facebook. It's the longest running non-stop dialogue in human history that incorporates virtually everything from how do you tie your shoe to how many other inhabited planets are there in the universe. So the problem becomes like this. To really be able to access Talmudic law or Talmudic wisdom, either you have to know the real rigorous, and I suggest that it's worth knowing, but you need to know the rigorous understanding of how Talmud is actually read and understood. Clearly, knowing the language will assist you. Art Scroll and Rabbi Steinsaltz, these are tremendous and wonderful work, but they're only going to kind of help you kind of skim the surface, which may be good. And at a certain point, you will definitely fall off the cliff, because as one of my friends once said, I don't own an ox, so I don't care if it gores another person's ox. So at a certain point, merely doing the translation, even with a commentary, at some point could make the Talmud tedious and boring, God forbid. So now the question is, this Talmud has survived everything from the Greeks or the Romans or what have you, right through Auschwitz, all the way to today. But suddenly our generation tends to be disconnected. When you move outside of the 5% of Am Yisrael that really are engaged in the Talmud, and even those which I call peripheral, the Daf Yomi, which God bless them, they're wonderful. But most people in Daf Yomi, it's just simply going straight through, and it's a rabbi sitting up there spoon-feeding them. And if you ask them what they learned 10 pages earlier, chances are very little. So once you move away from that, you find that in other Jewish circles, Talmud isn't even relevant. It doesn't apply, it doesn't speak, and so on. So the People's Talmud is an effort, a massive effort, to revamp, I don't want to say translate, but to revamp the Talmud in a way that's very accessible to the millennials and to this world today. So what the People's Talmud has done, from the beginning of the Talmud of Brachot till the end of Nidah, it, using certain criteria, has extracted 8,000 primary concepts of what's in the Talmud, and has repackaged them because it's a Talmudic primer, In other words, its job is like a spark plug to get you started, and from there, hopefully, you'll go on and on and on. But as a primer, as opposed to a translation, it has no loyalty to the actual text. Its loyalty is to the actual thinking behind the text. So therefore, when you suddenly hit upon a People's Talmud quote, which we'll see in our actual class tonight, you might actually find that Bob Dylan and Rabbi Akiva are in the same paragraph. And then that way is because all of a sudden you'll find out that when Andy Warhol said everybody's got their 15 minutes in fame, well, guess what? That's actually a Talmud on page so-and-so. So therefore, it becomes an effort to try to take the westernized, or the world, because it also includes a lot of Chinese thinking as well, and Asian and Hindu thought, and to show how the Talmud shares these ideas, or maybe has a different take on these ideas. Now the problem became, when you have this much information, how do you navigate? How do you access this information? So what therefore became necessary were to build multiple gates to help you, the end user, find this information. So the one gate is using prehistoric dinosaur technology called Google, where you put in a word and you get a word, whoop-de-doo, which is cool, it helps. Question is, what if you have a word, but the word's not there? Let's say, for example, you have a phrase called circumstantial evidence, and you're a lawyer and you want to look up the legal approaches of law in the Talmud. Well, you could type in existential circumstance, nothing's going to pop up, because there are no such words which would then be appearing in the translation. But guess what? There are at least 5 times in the Talmud that discusses in depth existential circumstances. So therefore what was done is we made 3 other gates, and one of these gates is called lifestyle, and it runs everything from animal kingdom down to zodiac. It's 450 different aspects of almost every facet of human life that it works in what is called in Talmudic language klal prat, as a group and a member of the group, so that, for example, you could come down under doctors and medicine, and a subcategory would be surgery and operations, and you would suddenly discover in the Talmud is brain surgery. You would suddenly discover the first liposuction surgery. You would find how to build a surgical room, how to prep a patient, and so on. Things which would be very difficult, in certainly an easy format, to be able to find that information. The third gate is just simple listings, which would help you in terms of finding categories. So let's say, for example, you go into holidays, you want to find Hanukkah, and shoot, it would pull together all of these various, degrees of concepts that relate to Hanukkah and so on. And the fourth one are about 2,000 plus one-liners, which we really refer to more as teasers. And the teasers are kind of designed for 2 functions. One is to get you to say WTF, which, if you don't know that expression, stands for watch the fun, right? Or it stands for welcome to Facebook. Oh, okay. But they are designed to get you to go, what? And as soon as you do what, and then you click on it, it brings you into more information. For example, I could come up here and I could start, well, you know what, I'll reverse this. Whoop. For example, I could go in, I could click on something which says how to perform a sex change. What? The Gemara talks about that? Yes, in fact, even Rashi brings it in Sefer Bereshit. What's Rashi bringing Sefer Bereshit? Yes, bingo. You're like maybe 6 out of hundreds of people I used to throw this out to. Exactly. Leah is pregnant. She does a quick mathematical equation that if the boy that she has were to come out, etc., and zzz, it becomes a girl. In fact, the Zohar brings the same story by Yosef. Was a girl, and Rachel, zzz, and it becomes a boy. So, okay, how to perform a sex change, that's one thing. I mean, you use prayer as opposed to surgery, but it's a sex change. So therefore, you suddenly put it in that vernacular, it captures the interest of people. And that's what these 2,000 plus one-lines do. But they have another function for people who really do enjoy learning. They become a tremendous way of chazorah, of reviewing learning. Because by going through these quick little one-liners and testing yourself with them, you get to see how much you really retain. In fact, we did a focus group test. We took people who, one woman who was in the group identified herself as a 3rd-generation left-wing atheist merits voting Israeli. To which I said, mwah, perfect. And we pitted her with others against a group of yeshiva guys. Or not yeshiva guys, religious guys who had just finished Baba Metzia in the Daf Yomi. And we presented both of them with approximately 35 of these little one-liner teasers that just run the gamut of Baba Metzia. And to the Chiloni, whatever that means, we gave them copies of the People's Talmud version of Baba Metzia. Guess who mopped the floor with who? It was unbelievable. It was really unbelievable. And as a matter of fact, if a person realizes what this tool is, again, it's not where the Talmud ends, it's where the Talmud can begin. It becomes a vehicle where any of us, myself included, you could, within a year, 3 times virtually upload into your brain, I'm going to say conservatively, even though I'm Orthodox, I'll say conservatively, 2/3 of all the ideas in the Talmud. I mean, what you do with it, that's another thing. We're not talking about being religious or non-religious. We're talking about if you're Jewish, this is your heritage. This is your wisdom. This is your knowledge. This is everything. It's you. It's not owned by one of the 12 tribes. It's owned by all of the people. And in fact, it's even wisdom for non-Jews. Because guess what? Here's the big surprise. There's only one God who makes all of us. So one God loves all people and would love knowledge because the world was created in wisdom. And so therefore, when we elevate our capability for being wise, the impact of a wiser nation is the easiest path to healing our world, tikkun olam. So that's what the People's Talmud is all about. And with the last 5 minutes I'll now give the 2-hour class I had prepared. Anyone who would like, fearing that this is what people would think, I will show you that this database is designed to develop various products. And one of them, of course, is an online app that would allow you full accessibility to be able, to see and use this information and so on. But another aspect is print. So we have, God willing, will be ready hopefully soon, next 6 months or so, the entire Shas in the People's Talmud version. And we also have this kind of like really trippy sort of, this is a mock-up, of course, but we will have something which will be about a 200-page catalog. The catalog is really quite cool because it uses a new kind of technology which is called print-to-digit. So print-to-digit means that you could like come in here, again, these are just example pages, but this would be, for example, it says the mystical, but there would be 15, 20 pages on the mystical, so you might discover that, and it always references where in the Talmud you can find these sources. So you'll find that the Gemara in Avodah Zarah discusses that there are actually 18,000 other inhabited planets in the universe. Okay, so you might read this little blurb, and again, we try to be very ADHD sensitive, so everything is like limited. But if you wanted more, you could then take your device, iPad or what have you, and it would read the page, and suddenly you would have an augmented reality where you would see little planets spinning around on your device while still looking at the page and bringing you more information, as well as a link to a website where you could then go further and further and further. So these are the various aspects of it. I'll leave this, anyone has a look afterwards, they're welcome to, but this is what I actually stole this, we're being recorded. I actually was inspired by the line of Levi's, if anybody remembers Levi's rye bread, you don't have to be Jewish to love Levi's. So that's what he put here, you don't have to be Jewish to love the Talmud, sharing Jewish wisdom with the whole world. And why? Because everybody has a soul. That's what the People's Talmud is in a very big nutshell. Okay, so having said that, I will just segue into the class, which is this idea of nobody gets out of here alive, or do they? What I did, what you could do, God willing, at the right time, and when we're ready and everything goes live, is you kind of like you drop your little coin into the slot machine, you pull it down, and and it just comes up like whatever. But I went in there, and I have, again, in that 450 section, there are one category which is called the destruction of Jerusalem. And when I use, that's all I used. I just used that one retrieval device of the destruction of Jerusalem, and it pulled out 55 different sources through the entire Talmud. Now, one other important thing, all this is in English. So it's very easy to use, and it's in English language. There is a certain amount of Hebrew/Aramaic tracking for the more advanced student who wants to look up a Gezerah Shava or whatever, but it's not designed for that person. It's designed for me and you who are more comfortable in English. So I drop in destruction of the Jerusalem temple, and whammo. What happens with this tool is, I remember in my yeshiva days, actually I remember in my early Baal Tshuva day, I remember The first day I was actually able to learn in the Gemara a complete line from beginning to end. It's kind of like going to summer camp, and I could remember taking one breath and really getting to the other side of the pool without, like, punking out. So I got to the other side, and I was so excited, and I said to the guy I was learning with, he was like from yeshiva background, unlike my Grateful Dead background, and I said this, and by the way, I think the Talmud is really cool, and I don't see one here, but I pointed, it's got that red, white kind of side on the thing, and it's sort of like you feel, when you open it, woo, you're going into another world. And then I said, look how beautiful the Talmud frames each page. He says, what are you talking about? No, well, here's the Talmud, and look at this frame. He says, Dodo, that's Rashi, and that's Tosfot, and that's another letter format, which you have to also read. And I was like, one line, but okay, fine. Meanwhile, jump cut, there's also a situation, even when I was then really learning yeshiva, if by the end of the Zman, as we call it, the semester, or whatever we wanted to call it, we had learned 5 pages, that was like unbelievable. It was great. I mean, it was as much fun as taking plastic paper bubbles and just popping them all day long. But it didn't feel like I got anywhere. I mean, when would I ever learn Shas? When would I really understand? And the amazing thing is when, for example, here, plopping in the destruction of Jerusalem, suddenly all these different Gemaras come together like a mosaic, and they create a picture that you don't see if you don't take this aerial view. In fact, I don't want to go too far down this line, so I want to get to the actual material, but I did this once on one of the other hundreds of choices, which is modesty as a way of life. And what's amazing is, when you drop this in, not only do you get these modesty references from all of the Talmud, but you also, assuming that the Gemara begins at the beginning with brachot, you see the chronology that the Talmud builds. For example, what is the first reference in the Talmud that it really explores the idea of modesty? What subject? Talmud for 10 points. What? Going to the bathroom. Long before you get to dress codes and other things, the first definition of modesty is in the Gemara Brachot about going to the bathroom. Wild. Like the holy bathroom. What is that all about? Because guess what? There's no better way to know who you really are than when you are alone. And if you show yourself modesty in the bathroom, it means you show dignity to yourself and respect to yourself, then certainly you will show that to everybody else. And that's you suddenly watch how, when you can look at the chronology of modesty through Talmud, you see how it builds and where it goes. And dress code is not even the second or the third. It comes much later. There's modesty in the way you speak, modesty in the way you dress. There's all these aspects of modesty that go into building the human being to a higher level of self-dignity and how that reflects to other people. So anyhow, now we'll start the class. Sorry. So this is supposed to be a class using a lot of People Talmud references that deals with, as I mentioned, the period of the 3 weeks that we are in. And the Gemara in Brachos begins with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara says there in the first parak, it says that when every time Rabbi Yochanan finished the book of Job, his gut said, he said that man is destined to death and the animal is destined to slaughter. He said, but while a man is alive, let him fill himself or herself with Torah and Ma'asim Tovim, with Torah, with wisdom, and with good deeds. To which the Maharal also points out that the entire Sefer Kohelet, I forgot how we say Kohelet in English. Ecclesiastes, that's why I forgot. Okay. Too many letters. Anyhow, I always tell people like ADHD, I'm like at the A, by like DHD, I'm gone. So like any word has more than 4 letters, bye. Anyhow, so the Maharal points out there that he actually quotes the Medrash that says the entire book of Kohelet is the last few verses. And that the whole book is only a Hagdama, it's only an introduction, where it begins with vanity of vanities. And only somebody like King Solomon could say vanity of vanities. Anyone else, the guy is bitter. But King Solomon really had it, and he could still say vanity of vanities. And therefore, what he has to do is he has to remove everything else from your world to finally get to, here's the bottom line. The bottom line is Torah and Ma'asim Tovim. That's the purpose of living in this world. And therefore, there's a negation process that makes us appreciate it. I used to say in my own words, by Noah's Ark, right? Just imagine, I mean, there's the whole anticipation for 120 years. And of course, the question is, you know, if God's going to go into the boat-making industry to produce one boat every 120 years, really small margins in that business. So obviously, the 120 years is the reference to human life. Moses, 120. Jewish person, 120. Although those of us that have been in Israel for many years remember when the old lira was replaced by the new shekel, everything was dropped a digit. So everybody just wished you until 12. But classically, life is 100 and... What's that?
First they drop one, then they drop 3 digits.
Right. So they don't wish you anything. Just good luck. Exactly. But the point is that the 120 represented a man's or person's life. What do you do with your life? And now Noah is in the boat. You know, the lion bites him, all the other things that go on, and it's a difficult journey. And finally, the door opens, and you could just imagine the ground is like sweltering and this and that, and he walks down to the ark, or to the altar that he builds. And I always think the Christians have a really good take on that. They have this classical image, which I'm jealous of because that's so cool, which is the clouds over that one beam of light coming down. So there's Noah, and the one beam of light comes down. What's the first thing God says to him? He says, now that I have your undivided attention. Sometimes a Kadosh Baruch Hu has to strip away in a person's entire life just to get them focused on what is life and how important life is and what that meaning is. I remember a friend of mine from Eshet Torah, Rabbi Berger, Matti Berger, he told me a story once. He was in America at a UJA event, and there were, he gave his class and whatever, and this one guy came up, had the kind of the look, with a cigar, probably thought this was like a portable ashtray or something, and he's like kind of showing off. And so, if you know Reb Matti, who's just an amazing, he's kind of good at the cut, ding, 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 going down, to size. So he says to the guy, he knows this is like quelling over his kids. He says, those your kids? And like the guy lights up like Nachas face. He says, yep. He said, what would you tell your kids is worth dying for? Kind of an interesting post-UGA fundraising question to ask. And the guy was like taken aback. And I'm sure the guy was expecting him to ask him like, well, which wing of the hospital did you donate, right? And so on. So he said, no, what would you tell your kids is worth dying for? And the guy was flabbergasted. He says, nothing. Really? Honestly? Nothing. If you can escape, no matter what the embarrassment, run away and fight another day, as somebody once said, right? So nothing. So he said, well, I'll tell you something. When you give birth to a child, the only thing you're promising the child is that he'll die. Because nobody gets out of here alive. So therefore, there must be something that while you are alive is so precious and so worthwhile that even if the price of admission is death, it's worth it. Because if you can grab that golden ring, you will never die. You will shed your body, but you will never die. You will live forever if you can connect with that. And that's what this world affords us, is this opportunity. So when we begin to look at that and we have to understand how precious time is. And Talmud says that there are 3 passions. One passion is the passion of heterosexual relations between man and woman. And trust me, that's a real passion. But even greater than that, believe it or not, is the desire for rain to impregnate the earth. And even greater than that is the desire, the moment a person dies, for the soul to want to get back in the body and to do things. It's kind of like when I was a kid. I remember it came up like, 4th grade or whatever, and you finish your exam and you bring it up, and when you come to the teacher's table, like, ooh, you notice there's the answer page there. And can I just see that for a minute? And she says, or he says, sure, but you gotta let go of yours. And once you let go, you can never take it back. So you let go, and right? So that's the same idea. The moment the game is over, bing, the eyelids open, and you really see what it was all about. But that's too late. That's not the time to wake up. There's a story they used to say that in Europe, when the borders were constantly changing, one particular time the border split the Jewish cemetery from the community, And the Jews complained to the border guards and said, look, we have to bury our dead. And they made special compensation. But being who we are, never to miss an opportunity, it became a wonderful smuggling route. So instead of taking out bodies, we took out jeans and diamonds and all the rest of it. And after a while, a new lieutenant shows up and he sees this is going on. And he sees the Jews are like carrying the thing and they're slugging down like the vodka and they're cracking jokes. And he says, what's going on? And the soldiers say, oh, no, they're going to bury their dead. Really? You know, actually, I'm going to take a time out and tell you the joke. It just reminded me of. So hold that thought. We'll just do the joke real fast. So there's a rabbi passing through town, and they suddenly see him, and they grab him and say, Rabbi, we have no rabbi in our town, and somebody just died. Can you eulogize him? I said, I'll try. I don't know. I don't know you. I don't know him. I don't know anything. He says, and what's the guy's name? Okay, Mr. Schwartz. Yeah, Mr. Schwartz. Mr. Schwartz was a man of great charity. Somebody yells out, no, he wasn't. He never gave a penny to charity in his life. Okay, fine. Mr. Schwartz was very hospitable. No, he never had anybody. Right? No, and the rabbi's getting embarrassed. Finally says, can't anybody say something nice about Mr. Schwartz? One guy says, yeah, his brother was worse. So anyhow, so now you have the lieutenant comes along and he says, like, what's going on here? And he says, burial. So he comes over to the Jews. He says, okay, Jews, open up the casket. Jews start to freak out. What are you talking about? Sacrilegious, respect for the dead. And they start to cry. Anyhow, they bust it open. There's no body in there. Now they're crying and they're crying. And the lieutenant says, you know what? Now you're crying? Had you been crying before, I would have never come over. Now you're crying? Now it's too late. So the question is, how do we wake up while we are alive to capture life? Because that's certainly worth capturing. Because we're all going to die. The question is, do we want to continue living forever? Or is this really Tachanat Sofi? Is this where we want to park the car? I don't think anybody here wants to park the car here. So therefore, the question is, how do we go forward? And that's really what the 3 weeks do every year. The 3 weeks are not morbid, they're sober. They are an opportunity to sort of do a timeout, wake up. Why am I here? Why are we here? And why are we here in Jerusalem, no less? Why are we here in Eretz Israel? Who are our people and what is our history and what is our future? And by waking up to that, it actually prepares us to Rosh Hashanah and to Yom Kippur, because it becomes a sober period that then gives birth, if you will, to Elul, which is an opportunity to really then rectify ourselves and to go forward. But to be able to understand all of this, we need to understand what were the causes and what was the impact of what brought about the 3 weeks. So the first thing I wanted to share is a couple of sources here, which I'll read with you, and you'll get a feel for the way the People's Talmud is written as well, or partly. I sort of reduced it for the class. The question is the warnings. What were the warning signs that Am Yisrael was receiving to be able to realize that there was real danger? Now, obviously, if you really want to go in there, the space for this is not the Talmud, although of course it's the Talmud, but it's primarily the Nevi'im, it's the prophets. But again, you could just read the Nevi'im, but without the Talmud, you wouldn't understand that Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu were actually dealing with totally different perspectives, even if they're talking about the same subject. And this is true in Kabbalah as well. When they talk about the Maisa Bereshit or Merkava, they're not talking from the same perspectives. But without the oral tradition, without the Talmud, one would not know that. And certainly if you go into the smaller Nevi'im like Hosea and so on, you don't understand how each one of them is really kind of filling in a whole picture as to what it's about. But the point I wanted to make here is just to show you how the Gemara, if you don't really know the vastness of Shas, you might not see how these pieces actually work together. Here's a Gemara in Yuma. The Talmud tells us that the destruction of the Jerusalem temple approached. For 40 years, the lottery of Leman Hashem, or for God, did not come up in the high priest's right hand. Now we know that on Yom Kippur, one of the miracles that happened was they had two pieces of wood, let's say, and one of them was Azazel, and one of them was for God, and they had the twin animals there, and what would happen would be actually, the Gemara says the high priest would announce which one he was going to pick. Even though he was going in for a blind draw, he would announce it, and sure enough, magically or miraculously, that one would come up. And the one that would come up in his right hand would always be the one for God, because right hand is the greater power than the left hand. And then the other one would obviously be in the left hand. However, for 40 years, suddenly this didn't happen. Suddenly, for the sake of God, was not happening. That was like the first little hello, the first little echo that was beginning. Not only that, it says for 40 years there was another miracle on Yom Kippur. And that was, they would take, I'm just going to say a ball of thread, because I forgot what it's called in English, but they would put this red or crimson thread that would be seen at the entrance of the temple where everyone would see it. And far away, when the other animal was pushed off the cliff of Azazel and the atonement had been achieved, a miracle would happen. And the red cloth would miraculously turn white. Red being a symbol both of Esav and the stain, if you will, of sin, and white representing the atonement. Both of these things ended, what was that? Purity. Thank you. Absolutely. I knew I was going to count on you. I mean, how to wait this long for the first input? Slipping, you're slipping. All right. However, now the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah takes the same subject and qualifies it a little bit deeper. Here the Gemara says that for 40 years in the second Beit HaMikdash, on each day of Yom Kippur, not only did the red thread not turn white, which is what the other Gemara in Yuma said, but here it says it turned a darker red. It was not just that it didn't show atonement or purity, but actually that it showed that the situation was deteriorating. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, again, the number 40 is a very important number. 40 always means stability. This, like for example, when you talk about a person should not learn Kabbalah until they're 40, it doesn't mean literally, because the Malbim was the greatest Kabbalist of his generation at the age of 13. So the idea of 40 always represents balance. That's why it's the letter Mem, which is 40, which is the middle of the Torah. And that's also many ideas, the 40 days and 40 nights and the 40 years and the flood again, the 40, and Vlad, that the baby is not human until the 40th day, which is why the numerical value of the word Vlad is 40, and so on and so on and so on. So that always represents a position of stability. So the stability was being lost. So now the Gemara in Sanhedrin brings, and it says, 40 years beforehand, the Sanhedrin moved out of its position. The Sanhedrin would realize that there was so much murder and chaos that had taken over Jewish civilization, as we'll see more in a few minutes about what the situation was like in the Second Temple, that they no longer could even judge these judgments, and they began to move away. However, now we got to jump back to the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. And now it will take that Gemara from Sanhedrin, and it'll help us understand what does that mean that the Sanhedrin moved away. And it says that the Sanhedrin moved 10 times from Jerusalem. 10 different tachanot, 10 different stops were made by the Sanhedrin, and each time was another way, hoping it would wake up the nation, that they would realize that the Sanhedrin is leaving them. And then the Gemara comes along and it says, at the same time, the divine presence began to leave the temple. And again the Gemara says that the divine presence didn't just leave, it left through 10 stages. And it even ends on almost a kind of a very sad, poetic note. It said that even as it left, in the hope that the Jewish people would wake up and feel like your mother is leaving and calling her back to her home, to your home, to the temple, it says that in the final and 10th step, which is when the divine presence was already in the desert, it said it lingered there for 6 more months before it finally said goodbye, in the hope that the Jews again would come back in their tshuva. And now a little bit closer to the end of the Beit HaMikdash, or of Jerusalem, the Gemara Baba Metzia points out that the markets, which were outside of Jerusalem, or around Jerusalem, but outside the walls, they were destroyed 3 years before the city. And the Gemara says, because the people would use Torah law to bypass rabbinic law. This is a very interesting thing. First of all, it's very interesting, as we'll see as we go a little bit deeper in a few more minutes, that the sages always had this filter on their eyes where they understood spiritual impact on physical consequence. In other words, in all of the literature of all of the Bavli and Yerushalmi, you will never see once that the sages said that Jerusalem was destroyed because the Romans were powerful or because the Jews were weak. It's not a cheshbon. It's never the thought. The thought is that it's all operating from a higher spiritual level. And this is why many of us know the infamous Gemara that when the Romans were rejoicing after Titus had had his madness where he took his sword and stuck it into the curtain in the holy of the Beit HaMikdash and blood came out and he said, I've killed God, like, hello, right? But that's what he believed. So in that madness, a voice had to come out and say, you have only ground flour. You've already killed people who are already dead, which our sages elsewhere say that evil people are dead even while they are alive, and holy people are alive even after they die. So therefore, at that moment when the city or whatever, the temple was being destroyed, it was clear there were spiritual ailments that were really the problem. The physical manifestation that the Romans had a major army, insignificant. And actually, if you study Tanakh, you find out there was some of the amazing stories in Tanakh that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he was assembling an army, even said, you know what? You've got too many soldiers. Send them back. I want it to be clear this is a miracle. I don't want anyone to think that the IDF is what resulted in the success. By the way, just as a side note, I always remember when I first came to Israel, and I am still impressed, but I was more impressed with the IDF than I was actually in the Israeli army. And after I was in the Israeli army, I became more impressed with God, because clearly I realized, this was like the Keystone Cops in green uniforms. But anyhow, thank God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sweet and he protects over us as we fumbled all over the place. But this is what was. In the Navi, it was the times where God said, it's got to be clear that it's Hashem that is bringing this forward. So now the question is, let's go into the causes, and you'll see this. The Gemara in Tainus says, when the Jerusalem temple was burning, which the Talmud says that both for the first and second temple, we both know they were destroyed on the same day of Tisha B'Av. They burnt to the ground on 2 days, actually, the 9th and the 10th of Av. Many of the young priests, the Kohanim, would climbed up on the roof of the temple, and they took the keys that were used in the service of the temple, and they threw the keys upwards, and they said, we are obviously not worthy of these keys, and then they leapt into the flames, committing suicide. At the same time, the Talmud says that the song, at that moment when the temple was being destroyed, that the Levites, the Leviim, were singing. It says, the Gemara just brings one pasuk, because we have a whole paragraph that we say, or Tehillim that we say each day. On that one it says, God turned upon them their own violence. So if you don't believe in coincidence, right, even the word mikra, which is the Hebrew word, if you look at the letters, it also spells rak mi Hashem, only from God. And even the word coincident, it's correctly coincidence. So therefore, the deeper you can go, the deeper you will see that like the Arizal says, there's no second in life and creation that's not unique. So you can find everything's purpose. Just a question of how deep we go. They once asked Reb Soloveitchik, Zechron Bracha, why in the Zman, in the upcoming yeshiva, were they going to learn Beitza? The Beitza, in the Gemara in Beitza, all there are rabbinic laws. There's no Torah law there. And he says, well, that's why it's called Beitza. It's not the Gemara, it's you. How well do you know how to cook an egg? So the more you know how to cook the egg will be more tasty. The less. So it's the same idea here, that they were able to understand that it wasn't a coincidence that at the moment of destruction, the song that the Levites would be singing would be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was bringing our own violence upon ourselves. And what was our violence? So for that, we go to, which everybody here I'm sure is familiar with, the famous story in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Like it's when your dad used to say to you, right, you would be crying and your dad says, you want something to cry about? I'm going to give you something to cry about. Well, that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said with the infamous story of the spies. They came back and they were all crying, and Hashem said, oh yeah, you like to cry? I'm going to see to it that every night this year, the same year, will be a day of crying. That was Tisha B'Av, when they were crying with the return of the spies. And Gemara says there, it's very interesting language, but I don't want to go off on the side, but I'll just throw it out. It says that the spies spoke with their mouths what their eyes did not see. But that's for another class. And that became the birth of Tisha B'Av. So now, I have a little side note here, that same Gemara, because it's quite beautiful. It talks in contrast of crying for nothing about crying for something. And the Gemara there says, for example, what's called good crying. It says, crying at night, because the heavenly forces will cry with you. And then it says, when it comes to other people, Talmud makes it known that it is good to cry for your friends who are in trouble or pain, and says that Rabbi Gamliel, Okay, this is like a 480 hitter, right? This is Rabbi Gamliel we're talking about here. The head of the court, the head of the Sanhedrin, the head of the Jewish people. I mean, really, the man upon all, I mean, the descendant of Rebbe, this was a tremendous man. Nonetheless, the greater the rabbi, I have found in my own personal encounter, the greater the rabbi, the more human, the more down to earth, the more sensitive, the more practical they are. So here the Gemara says that Rabbi Gamliel had a neighbor. It doesn't even say who the neighbor was, but the neighbor had a son who died. The Gemara says that Rabbi Gamliel cried so much for his neighbor's pain that all of his eyelashes fell out. So that's not a alligator tears. That's real cry. That's real feel. That's real love. That's real compassion. That's real understanding. That's real, I'm sorry, I'm busy right now, I'm dealing with a state of affair. There's a human, my neighbor, in pain, I cry. Doesn't matter what your level or status is. And that was the beauty of a giant like Rabbi Gamliel. Anyhow, back to our story. We then have, of course, coming back, we're looking here for what was our violence. We have, this is probably the most infamous, although really famous, of all the Gemaras, and that's the Gemara in Gittin, which it says there, I'll just read it out. The Talmud is discussing the destruction of the second Talmud, seems to point to several factors that add up to the cause. What is interesting to note is that the reason, I just actually said this, that's never Gittin is because of the strength of the Romans or the weakness of the Jews. Nonetheless, the Gemara says that the Jewish people in Jerusalem had enough supplies to last for 21 years of the siege. But because of internal Jew against Jew, all of those supplies, because the party that wanted to force the Jews into combat, they destroyed all of those supplies. And then the Gemara talks about three of the most incredibly wealthy individuals in those days, such as Mikdamian, Ben Gurion, and so on and so on. What they did, giving tremendous wealth to try to avoid the calamity. And of course, the sad story of Reb Tzadok, who again, back to 40, fasted for 40 years before the destruction of Jerusalem, because he was trying through his fast as a very holy man, as his name Tzaduk would imply from Tzaddik, try to be able to save Jerusalem. However, the worst of it all, which is also the same Gemara, is the infamous story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. And those of you that don't know it, I'll just tell it to you very fast to keep it brief. But this was an individual whose worst enemy was Bar Kamsa, and his best friend was Kamsa. And he was having a huge party, and he sent out his messengers to go and bring his friend Kamsa, and made a mistake. He went to Bar Kamsa. And when Bar Kamsa heard that he had been invited to his arch enemy, he thought, wow, look at that. You know, my arch enemy, maybe he's reaching out, maybe he's doing tshuva, maybe he's trying to bridge. I'm going to respond, and I'm going to bridge. Then, unfortunately, what happened all of a sudden was, when Bar Kamsa was in the middle of the meeting and the Baal Habayit, the master of ceremony, saw this, he's outraged and says, leave immediately. And Bar Kamsa says, look, I'll pay for my food, leave immediately. I'll pay for the whole freaking wedding. Just don't embarrass me in public. Leave immediately. And as he left, he realized that the rabbis all sat there and nobody said boo. Nobody cared about his pain. And so he left, and he became an authentic self-hating Jew who was bent on destroying in revenge the Jewish people. And he comes to Vespasian, who was the head of the Roman Empire, and he makes up this whole lie that the Jews are rebelling. And he says, give me a korban, and I will an offering, and I'll prove it. And he does a whole little shtick to disqualify it, etc., etc., etc. But here's the mind-blowing part of the Gemara, in case you don't remember the ending. And this is really, I mean, there's so much on it. We can go a whole class on this one thought, but we're not going to. I'll just throw it out so it'll haunt you forever. So you can think about it. But the Gemara says that how horrible is embarrassing a person, especially in public. So the Gemara says that because of the pain that Bar Kamsa had, HaKadosh Baruch Hu helped him to destroy the temple and Jerusalem. Because for some reason, somehow, without that primary ingredient of compassion for the other. And the reason they're called the other is because they're not like you. That's why they're the other. Otherwise, they're in your camp. So when you take off these nonsense glasses of Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Jewish, Gentile, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. It's about loving God's world and the people that are in it. and understanding how each of us play a different role and different function and so on. Maybe there are problems, of course, when it comes down to legal issues and how to resolve them, and that's authentic. Because the Talmud is not a place where everyone gets together and agrees. The Talmud is where everyone gets together and argues. But there's a kosher way to argue. You argue where you respect your opponent. You understand that your opponent is an intelligent person. And therefore you don't make a mockery, you don't make a fool of him, you don't make jokes about him or her. You respect your opposition. And by that respect, you will receive respect. And when you have a situation of respect, you have dialogue. And through dialogue can come resolution. And that's what we lost. We not only lost the respect of Bar Kamsa for his opponent, if you will, but the ability to embarrass him at all costs. That means we've lost the whole idea of what the temple was for. We didn't deserve to have a temple. In fact, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says an extraordinary thing. Who is the arch enemy of the Jewish people? Amalek. Where did Amalek come from? Well, his mother was named
Naama?
close, a similar letter, but Naama was actually the wife of Noah.
Right.
Anybody? Timnah. Yes, who is Timnah? Timnah was this wild woman. We don't know for sure who her father was. There are a couple options on the board. But she was this wild woman, and Timnah went to convert to become Jewish. She was Abraham, she goes to Yitzchak, she goes to Yaakov. You can look it up, don't believe me. It's Gemara Sanhedrin on Daf 99 Amud Bet. And she goes to all three of them, she's rejected. And she says, and Rashi brings it to Chumash as well, she says, it's better I should be a Pelegish, I should be a concubine, thank you, to Esav's family than to not be part of this holy family. So she marries Esav's son, marries as a concubine, Eliphaz, and her child is Amalek. Amalek, just think about what's going on today. Amalek was born from a sperm, from a rejected potential convert. Somebody who really wanted to be part of Am Yisrael. It's an amazing thing. And not just rejected, but from Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But it just meant to say that we had not risen to the level of the full tikkun. The tikkun is that deep level of understanding. If the temple was destroyed by random hatred, the temple can only be rebuilt by unjustifiable love. Not love that's deserving, not qualified love, unjustified love. That person doesn't deserve to be loved. Love him. That's the opposite of baseless hatred. It's not about correct love. It's about incorrect love. It's about V'ahavta l'recha chomocha regardless, and being able to feel that sensitivity and to avoid that pain. Anyhow, so now the Gemara comes and says one more thing. It goes step by step. What actually led step by step? There's an amazing Gemara in Shabbos, where it goes step by step. And you can actually, if you just go carefully through the Gemara, you'll see the deterioration, but I've laid it out for you here. It begins with the breaking of the bond of the nation when Shabbat was no longer observed properly. The first thing the Gemara says that was the beginning of the end was there was no longer a sense of the connection of what Shabbat brings to the Jewish people and how it connects us to God. I want to just tell you a personal story because I've lived here for quite a few years. So in the first time ever movie theater opened in Jerusalem on Shabbat, there were the Shabbat or Shabbos protests. And what would happen would be very religious people would go to the movie theater on Friday night and they would start screaming, Shabbos! Shabbos! And my Rav at the time, Rabbi Mordechai Weinberg from the Old City, Rabbi Mordechai Scheinberg, okay, we were sitting around and we were discussing this, and he said, if I were to lead these demonstrations, I would do them very differently. And everyone said, okay, Rebbe, what would you do? I'm going to go down there Friday night, and I'm going to scream, Shabbos! Like, what? Isn't that what they're doing? No. They're screaming, Shabbos! But I'm going to scream, Shabbos! So I don't know if you guys grew up with High Life magazine. We had like the little pictures and you had to find which one was different than the other one. So like we're trying to write, okay, I know my Rebbe's brilliant, but I'm missing something. It must be me. What was the difference? He said, I'll tell you what the difference is. When they scream Shabbos, what they're really screaming is, if I could, I'd kill you. When I scream Shabbos, what I'm saying is, if I could, I would love you to come to my house for Shabbos and to see what a Shabbos is. To experience the beauty. Because if you really came to my home and you saw how wonderful Shabbat is, you wouldn't dream of doing it harm. So that was his understanding of what it means. But that's the beginning of the break. The second level of the beginning of the break, the Gemara says that they then began to lose their personal bond to God, because they no longer would recite the Kriya Shema correctly. And therefore, by no longer having that particular bond, the Gemara says children were no longer sent to school to study Torah or God's wisdom. You know, it's interesting, I don't know if you followed this, but Lapid, to his credit, recently said, like last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, he said in the press that his children, or maybe one child, just graduated high school from one of the top high schools in the country, and he cannot believe they never saw a Daf Gemara. Forget being religious. Don't think about that. Just leave that aside. That's between the king and I, you and God. But to be ignorant? I mean, be intelligent. You know, I remember when I was being chapped, as they say in Spanish, into becoming religious, the guy who was very much involved, Mordechai Schiller, he said to me, he said, you know, you're not a non-religious Jew. You're like a default Jew. You're like a Jew for nothing. If you want to be a non-religious Jew, you have to be educated. You have to learn what is Shabbat to say, I don't keep Shabbat. You can't say I don't keep Shabbat if you have no idea what Shabbat is. That's not called a non-religious Jew. So I actually went to yeshiva to become a non-religious Jew so that I knew what I was talking about. And the amazing thing is, the more I learned Torah, the more I realized it wasn't at all what I thought it would be. So it was a complete reverse. I remember once, you know, in the yeshiva days, I was at Or Sameach. I was one of the early Talmidim at the yeshiva, and they would bring me and another one of their guys often in to do like the little when the rich guy would show up. It was always interesting to hear the different questions they would ask you. And I remember Paul Reichman, Zechron Bracha, he was really, really brilliant. And he says to me, he says, how do you know you're now religious? How do you know that at this point, you know, at that point already, I already had a black hat. I bought a suit, which came with a little packet of self-applied dandruff. You know, I knew how to do I was totally in. So he said, how do you know this is for real? How do you know this isn't just a fad that's going to pass away? And so I said, well, because I feel comfortable talking in shul during davening. So that's how I knew I had made it. But the point is that connection, that self-connection of knowing our relationship of the Shema and that concept of education, it's not even about being religious. It's just about being knowledgeable, knowing what it is. So, you know, there's another Gemara, which I don't want to go into much now, but just to show you how this plague of lack of education is not new to our generation. The Gemara says elsewhere, I don't remember if it was Eliyahu Navi, I think it might have been, he was walking through the destruction and he saw a child who had come from a very illustrious, wealthy family picking barley seeds out of animal dung to eat. And he said to the little boy, do you want to live? I can save your life. And the little boy said, of course I want to live. Just tell me what to do. And he said, say Shema Yisrael. And the little boy said, no way. I was trained never to say Shema Yisrael. I was trained to never open up and have a connection to God. And the Gemara says he pulled out a little idol and unfortunately fell on the idol, and that was the end of his life. And so therefore we can see the power of education, how it can be a double-edged sword in the two directions in which it goes. The next step, the Gemara says, then they began, once they disconnected the nation and the individual from God, they then disconnected their connections to each other. The Gemara says the relationships between people became weakened with the rise of arrogance. No one saw anyone else as being more important than themselves, and people just stopped caring about each other. The next level. Then came the worst of both worlds when people started to ridicule righteous scholars, which was a smack in the face of God's chosen ones, and just simply between people not having any respect for people who were different than them. And then the straw that broke the camel's back, what would be, normally I try to do the whole class in just one breath, but this way I have to take two. What would be, like, after all of these horrible events, remember like the movie Close Encounters, like, okay, now they see there's one spaceship, wow, now they see a lot of spaceships, then the mother spaceship shows up. So what was the mother spaceship that finally broke the Jewish people and led to the destruction of Jerusalem? And it says, there were no more men of truth, meaning there were no more honest businessmen to be found in Jerusalem. It's an amazing idea. But this idea of honesty in business somehow is the final cord that holds it all together. And then in the absence of that, that becomes the thing which destroys everything. And what's even more important, and this again is the whole idea, what is the lesson of the 3 weeks? The lesson is to teach us it can happen. It can happen. It can really happen. God forbid, we could all be stripped naked and brought into the street right here and shot by Hamas. Happened in Europe, it could happen here. To quote Meir Kahana, Zechron Bracha, he once said that if you say it can't happen, you should believe it's already begun. And if you say it could happen, then you will be alert to make sure it never will. And so that's the lesson of the 3 weeks. It happens. If we blow it, there's ramification. This is not an intellectual process. This is life or death for our families and ourselves. And that's the wake-up call of what the 3 weeks are supposed to bring forward. Just a few more things here. The Gemara Chagiga says of the 18 negative prophecies in the book of Isaiah, the worst of all of them, according to the Talmud, is that the Jewish nation's leaders became like foxes, sons of foxes, clever, wicked people, but they acted righteous. Right? So I actually have my own little insight on that. I say that at what point did Yitzchak know that he could give the blessing to Yaakov? Right? Yitzchak was no fool. He wasn't fooled because he was blind. Please. This is the first man to go through the resurrection of the dead. He was vision beyond our world, and through the merit, the Gemara in Shabbos says, of Yitzchak, the Mashiach comes. All world tikkun is through Yitzchak. So he was not fooled by a little charade that, it feels like Esau, okay, I'll give you the blessing. That wasn't it at all. He knew that you needed power to fix the world. Esau was a powerful man. Therefore, he knew if he could just channel and harness that power for good, then Esau would rectify the world and allow Yaakov to sit and learn all day long. It would be a team that they would work together. But then when he realized that Yaakov was able to morph the two, Yadayim, Esau, that Yaakov knew how to have the strong and the powerful hand. He wasn't just a yeshiva bacher. He was a man of the world like King David, but like King David, he didn't lose his spirituality. So call Yaakov. His voice remained holy and pure, even though his body had to get out there and get dirty in the world of Esau and be successful in combat. That's when he realized, I can give the bracha to Yaakov because he's able to do both of them into one package. Sadly, there are people today that have reversed that process. When you look at them, they look very holy. They have the hands of Yaakov. But when you listen carefully to their words, they're the violent and malicious and anger. It's the voice of Esau that comes out. It's not the voice of Yaakov. I mean, certainly, thank God, we are blessed with many authentic tzaddikim and real Talmidei Chachamim. But we have to understand that in every generation, there are still the 10 spies. We just have to know which one of the 12 was Kalev and Yeshua. But there's still the 10 spies. And so therefore, this is something that becomes the most devastating, as the Gemara says, when all of a sudden you have leaders who act righteously, but they're clever and sneaky and dishonest like foxes. The Gemara goes on and says as well, just one second here, the Gemara in Baba Metzia says, the Gemara in Shabbos. Throughout the Torah and the Talmud, there is no lack of emphasis upon the need for honesty in courts and in the legal systems. Many people who care about bringing the world to a better place don't realize how central and crucial an honest and accessible court system is for healing a society. When people feel they cannot get a fair decision because the courts are corrupt, or they are so overwhelmed that judgments are delayed for years, or that the courts have no teeth, and even if they issue a fair decision, they have no proper enforcement tools, this is the beginning of the end of that society. The Talmud highlights the horror of what it was like with corrupt courts, scribes, and lawyers towards the end of the first temple and the downfall of Jerusalem. The Talmud cannot drive this point home strong enough. It says that all punishment that come into this world are due to bad judges. It also says that the divine presence will not rest in Israel until all corrupt judges and leaders are removed from the land. The Talmud adds that if we get rid of the bad judges, we will also get rid of the corrupt police. And if we get rid of the egomaniacs and arrogant, self-hating Jews, we will also get rid of those people who cause the nations of the world to hate us. On top of that, the Talmud says that God will crush those Torah scholars who help their extended family become corrupt judges and then cover up for their evil. One more Gemara. This is Gemara in Yuma. This also might be quite well known. The Gemara says that there were those who were holy on the outside. Again, these are just 2 points to emphasize the point I wanted to make before, which is the idea of the hands are the hands of Yaakov, but the voice is the voice of Esav. So Gemara in Yuma says, people who are holy on the outside but very corrupt on the inside. Talmud tells of a very sad time in Jewish history when, during the period of the second temple, the other one was the first temple, the position of the high priest was being bought with money instead of earned with real merit. Talmud contrasts the true holy priest of the first temple with a corrupt high priest of the second temple. The first temple stood for 410 years and had only 18 Kohen Gadol's, while the second temple lasted 420 years and had more than 300 Kohen Gadol's. Tragically, both of the temples met with a horrible end. However, the Talmud goes on to say that the first Jerusalem temple was destroyed because the nation became involved in idolatry, immorality, and murder. This is the famous Gemara everyone's probably familiar with. While the Mishkan, many people aren't aware of this, the Mishkan was destroyed, and it had stood also for almost 400 years. It was destroyed because of immorality and disrespect for holiness. But the second Jerusalem temple was destroyed because of the people's unjustified hatred for each other. Now watch this. This is amazing. Watch how the Gemara wraps this point up. From this, the Talmud learns that unjustified hatred is equal to idolatry, murder, and immorality combined, since it took these three sins to destroy the temple, but only hatred to destroy the other temple. Now watch this. The Talmud makes an interesting observation stating that while the people of the first Jerusalem temple, can we use the word chiloni if they're involved in idolatry and immorality? And I mean, look, could we say that maybe? So of them, it says that while they were wicked, they still trusted in God. And strangely, the Gemara says, okay, even more strange is that that would have been cool. I stapled them out of order, and somehow it would have made sense of it. That was really bad. Sorry. Okay, sorry. So it says here, and still they trusted in God. However, whoops.
This is the first temple people?
Yes. And you may never know the other one because, oh my gosh, I actually forgot. Okay, page 5 is gone. So I'll just have to tell you. But by the second temple, the Gemara says that while they were very observant and they learned Torah, they did not really believe in God, which is kind of amazing. Because when you think that the whole reason that you're observant and you believe in God, is because you believe in God. So I remember Reb Noach Weinberg, Zichron Bracha, the Rosh Hashiva of Eshet Torah, once told me something very interesting. He said that when God opened the doors for the Jews to come back into Eretz Yisrael, the non-religious Jews seized the opportunity. It was supposed to be all the yeshivas that were supposed to come back and build this as a Torah center. But they stayed on the sidelines, and the non-religious Jews came and they did all the work. And then he said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu then opened up the gates of heaven to bring tshuva into the world. And who grabbed tshuva? All the non-religious Jews. We grabbed it. We became Bali tshuva. But Hashem wanted the religious people to do tshuva. But he said that's difficult. Because the religious people often, of course there are many exceptions, grow up in the same way if you'd grown up with Mao Zedong and you had your little red book. It's a lifestyle. It's not a process that a person necessarily goes through. And God forbid, the outcome of not processing what you go through could lead to somebody who's very observant and really does not believe in God. And on the other hand, you could have the beauty of the Jew in the fact that he might or she might have estranged themselves so far with all kinds of horrible sins, but still deeply believe in God. In fact, I'll just share with you, Rabbi Breitowitz, give equal time, Eshet Torah Or Sameach, from Or Sameach once said a very beautiful thing. Everybody knows, I'm assuming, the Midrash that says there were 3 reasons the Jews were able to come out of exile. Because they didn't change their Jewish names, they spoke Hebrew, and they dressed like Jews. Really? Let's take a Jew named Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's take Moshe Rabbeinu. Was Moshe a Hebrew name? No. Egyptian name, right. Or W.C. Field said, Egyptian, right? It was an Egyptian name, okay? What was Moshe's Hebrew name?
Victor.
That's the Medrash. What does the Gemara say? Yes, Tuvia. Tuvia, Tov, and Avigdor. Those are the 3 names, Moshe's Jewish name. I promise you, if you ever want to win in trivia, most Jews will not know the answer. Moses, greatest Jew of all time, split the sea, got the... Guess what? His name wasn't Hebrew. Strike 1. Did Moshe dress and look like a Jew? No. What did Zipporah tell her father? I just met an Egyptian, right? So she didn't come back and say, somebody from Meir Sharim just wandered over here in the desert. She said, I just met an Egyptian. Doesn't even look Jewish. And probably coming out of the castle or palace of Pharaoh, probably also spoke Egyptian. So, what's that?
He wasn't dressed.
Yes.
He was the other Jew.
Oh, hold on. But the rule was 3 things and you get out of jail for free. Right. And Moshe struck out. And last time I played b-ball, baseball that is, 3 strikes, you're out. Moshe had 3 strikes, you're out. But he wasn't out. Okay? I mean, actually, that's a little side point. I always...
The kid was outside.
Well, I always, that's a little... Okay, we're going to hold that thought. Quick little side joke. So, yeah, please, sir.
You know, I'm 79 years old. When you reach a certain age, you either have heard it all or almost heard it. I have never heard this. And you are 100% right.
Whew, thank you.
100% right.
So that's the end of my class. That's all I needed. So yeah, so I'm going to hold that thought because I'll just tell you something else sort of kind of funny if you really think about it. Moses was the original weatherman, SDS, revolutionary, right? And what does he do? He's the one who's going to bring the revolution right to Paro's face. But God, interestingly enough, says, hold on. I want you at 3:59 in the morning, get down to the water, hide behind the bushes, and pop out when Pharaoh is going down. Now, why was Pharaoh going down at 4 o'clock in the morning? Because in case you ever look up in the word in dictionary under God, you'll see gods don't go to the bathroom. So since Pharaoh was God, he never went to the bathroom, probably a little golden cork or something, but he didn't go to the bathroom. So what happened? Most men can tell you this. You wake up in the morning, he makes a beeline down to the water. And while everyone is sleeping, you hear, ah, right? That was Pharaoh. So God knew this. So God said to Pharaoh, get there at 3:59. So, I'm sorry, so thank you, to Moshe, right, get there at 3:59. So, Pharaoh's cutting down, Moshe pops out, and Pharaoh's doing the famous one-leg juggle, right? And all of a sudden, he says, yo, Mo, what do you want? He says, let my people go. Make a deal. Let me go, I'll let you go, right? So it's like, right? Just the beauty of the humor of God playing with this moron who thought he was God. Anyhow, back to our point. 1, 2, 3 strikes. You're out, Moshe. So what did that medrash mean? So Breitowitz explains it beautifully. Somebody who's connected to God doesn't need that. Somebody who's really learning Torah and living it doesn't need that. But for the guy whose name is Itzi, and the first shirt on his button is here, and he's got this big hairy chest, and on it is a giant Magen David, and he's in Tel Aviv, and he's making falafels, and he's talking Hebrew, wearing Magen David, and everyone knows him as Itzi, he's coming with us. He's also coming. That's what the Medrash is teaching us. Not that you need those things to connect to God. God knows if you're there or if you're not there. But God loves us so much that even if that's all you have, you're still part of the family and you're still coming along. Okay, let's try to wrap this up with one last thing here. Especially since I left out a whole page. You know, I say this, but I'll just repeat it because I just sort of love it. But some of you are old enough to remember cassettes. So when I was teaching, and it would be the time when people said, do you mind if I leave the recorder up here? You know, and then all of a sudden you would hear pop and someone would come running from the back. And so one of my greatest joys in life was waiting till they came up, and when they would flip it, I would say, and that is the meaning of life. Imagine rewind, trying to find out. Can't do it anymore, it doesn't work. It's like telling somebody taking pictures, well, how many more you got left on the roll? It doesn't mean anything, you know? So to wrap this up here, I'm going to take you into a whole nother space. And we're going to share with you, what do we deal with the 3 weeks? So the 3 weeks come from the other side, no, not of the moon, but the other side of the mountain, right? We have Passover to Shavuot. We're climbing. We reach the 50th gate of wisdom, which is where you go beyond time and space, and now you connect and you receive the infinite and so on. And that's wonderful. But how do you come down off the mountain? What's it like coming down? If you guys are hikers, you'll know coming down is much more dangerous than going up. Because if you fall going up, you're okay. Fall going down, it could be bye-bye. Exactly. So how do you come down off the mountain? How did Moshe come down off the mountain? So the precedent of how to come down off the mountain was from Avraham. Avram goes up on, just around the corner here, Har Moriah. He offers up his son Yitzchak. Won't go into that right now, what that's all about. When he comes back down, that the language was, he walked with the Na'arim. The Na'arim were actually two brilliant, fully developed individuals of Ishmael and Eliezer, but they were called Na'arim because compared to Avram, they were just like movements. They weren't really people at that point. And still, he understood how to be with them. That the greatness of spirituality is, God forbid, not being above people, but being with people, by being with everybody. It says by Moshe Rabbeinu, if you talk to the greatest scholar, he talked scholarly, but if it was a little child, he talked boop, boop, bow, bow, because he talked to each person as to who they were, because it's all beautiful in front of God. So therefore, you have to understand that Avram came down off the mountain, not to blow away everybody, but to enhance everybody, to be with them, and gently help them to go step by step higher. Same thing by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu did not break the first luchot out of anger. Hey, darn it. That was not what happened. He understood that the nation couldn't handle these luchot. He couldn't handle these tablets. He saw they're still building idols. They just built the golden calf. There's no way they'll be able to understand what the first tablets represent. I'm going to get rid of this because it's more important that I'm going to go back down the mountain and be with the nation. So what happens is, we now receive an unbelievable light of Torah on Shavuot. That light of Torah is given specifically as we come down the mountain heading towards Tisha B'Av. Because inside Tisha B'Av is the future rectification of the whole world. Tisha B'Av is called Moed, which is a holiday. Tisha B'Av is the birth of Mashiach. Tisha B'Av is the future Beit HaMikdash. Tisha B'Av is everything we long for, but we have to rectify it. And the only way we can rectify it is by elevating the world, A, through personal example, not by preaching, but by being, and B, by helping, by crying till our eyelashes fall out if some of our neighbors are in pain. And by having that level of sensitivity, that's our ability. And this is why Rabbi Nachman of Breslov points out that when we, on Tisha B'Av, when we read the book Kinot, which is to mourn or to cry, they are the same letters as the word tikkun, which is to fix. Which means if you believe you can destroy, then you have to know you have the power to rectify. And that's what, if actually in the Gemara, many times there'll be an argument and they will not be resolved. And the point will be, as we say in modern day Hebrew, teku. Right? Teku in Hebrew today means a tie. But it means it could be an unresolved argument. Why was it unresolved? Because they were unable to get to the 50th level of wisdom where there is no conflict. So therefore it fell short. They didn't have the ability to reach the 50th level of wisdom. But when Eliyahu comes along, which is what the word teku actually refers to Eliyahu, when he comes along, he will bring the 50th gate of wisdom. That's why if you take the word teku and you add the nun, it spells tikkun. Because that's what's missing in the world, is that tikkun. And how do we do this? We do this, each one of us on our own levels, and this is the last point of the class, and that is through our praising God. Now, it's very easy, or easier, to praise God when everything is going well. Having never personally experienced everything going well, I wouldn't know. But friends of mine who've experienced things going well in their lives have told me it's easier. But when things are not going well in your life and you still praise God, that is awesome. And I'm going to show you something which I found awesome. It comes from the Kabbalah, but it'll show you how we actually praise God from the most painful and the lowest of all levels. And that is, I'm going to say the word once, but then I'm going to distort the word because it's got God's name in it. That is the word hallelujah, which is hallel, to praise God, ka, as God's higher name. That name of hallelujah, which I'll now use as its pronunciation, that name there has the numerical value of 86. 86 will immediately, a lot of people here in the yeshiva background will know, is the numerical value of Elohim. God, as Elohim, created this world. It doesn't say Boreshit Bora Hashem, it's Boreshit Bora Elohim. God, Elohim, and Elohim is the same numerical value as the word Ha-Teva, the world of nature. The aspect of godliness that creates natural order and science is operated by the name of Elohim. And that, therefore, to recognize that Elohim, Hu Hashem, or Hashem Hu Elohim, as we say on Yom Kippur, is the ultimate of Shema Yisrael. To understand that the aspect of God is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is above nature, and the aspect of God is Elohim, which is the force of nature, is all echad. It's all one. That's the whole game, to be able to realize that. As the Maharal explains, that the challenge of understanding, this is actually the Star of David, the world of the physical world is to realize that there is nothing natural about nature. Nature is just a series of incredible miracles. So the challenge is to see the miraculous nature of nature. And conversely, on the spiritual world, is to understand that it's not miraculous. There is a science, there is a nature. Learn Ramchal to understand that the spiritual world has a real order to how it works. There's a science behind it. So there's understanding the nature of the miraculous while understanding the miracle of nature. And that will unlock and bring together those two planes into echad, into one. One motivated by Hashem, one motivated by Elohim, and they are both a Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's one level of Hallelujah. Another level of Hallelujah is that there are multiple names of Hashem. One name of Hashem is Ekia. Again, I'm distorting the correct pronunciation. Ekia is what God said to Moses at the burning bush. I will be what I will be. Ekia is called Keter. It's the crown. It's the highest level where we don't question anything from God. It's whatever God is, it's God, so therefore it's okay. It's just beyond our little PCs. We don't have that mainframe wisdom, so we have to defer to it as it's God. Ekia. And then there is also another name of Hashem, which is Adakoi, which is the way we actually pronounce Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, is Adakoi, from the word master. And Adakoi is God's name as Malchut, on this ground. So therefore, when one says Hallelujah, to praise God, they are actually bringing the highest level of Hashem's name, Ekia, and bringing the crown down to the kingdom of Malchut. That's the other aspect. And here's the last thing. If you look at the word Hallelujah, you'll notice that it actually has God's name in it. It has God's name, four-letter name of God, and it also has twice the letter Lamed. So the four-letter name of God, it's called, I'll say in Hebrew, Tziruf Otiot, in the way that the letters are ordered. You know that in the creation of the world, God permeated the four-letter name of God in 12 different aspects. Each one of them are the primary force behind each month of the year. And that's why you have 4 seasons. Each one is a different letter of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, and so on and so on. So the order of the letters of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei in this particular arrangement of Hallelujah is the month of Av. It's the month of tragedy. And so therefore, we have the ability through the letter Lamed, like Rabbi Akiva says in his famous book called the Book of Letters. The letter Lamed represents the heart. He says there because the heart sends blood in both directions through the body. But the idea of the letter Lamed is it's actually two words. It's Lomed and Lamed. It's to learn and to teach. It's to receive and to give. That's the Lamed. So the challenge of this world called Laila, darkness or night, is that the Yud-K, the higher essence of God, can be found, but you need to go through the learning process. And why there are two Lameds in Laila? For the same reason there's two letters Bet in Kriya Shema Levavacha, the double Bet, because the Gemara says your Yetzer Tov and your Yetzer Hara. You have to serve God with every power that you have, your power for good and your power for bad. Channel it all to service of God. And that's the double Lamed. And that's the ability to convert night into day. And when you reveal that, it goes from Laila into Hallelujah, to praise God. That at that point, a person can come into the month of Av, into the darkest of it all, still praising God, still bringing the crown down to this level, and converting Tisha B'Av from the most horrific day in our history to Bezrat Hashem, the greatest of all holidays of our future. Thank you very much.